Hello and welcome to the Cardboard Crash Course, everybody. My name's Ethan, and we're talking about the Mentak Coalition today. I'm actually super excited to talk about these guys. I wasn't really too impressed by them in the base game, but I think that they've gotten a little bit of a boost in this Prophecy of Kings expansion. So let's go over a component overview as well as an analysis later in the video, so stay tuned for that. And I'll show you some of the new equipment that I've got for the videos. I'm slowly improving these, so if you want to see more improvements, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and we're going to keep pumping these out. Especially after the faction guides, I've got a lot of more ideas. So stay tuned, Twilight Imperium fans and board game fans in general. Without further ado, let's head out and check out the Mentak Coalition. Alright, before we get into the faction sheet here, I'd just like to point out the backdrop. This is a beautiful new neoprene mat that you can also use for all of your card game purposes. It's available on cardboardcrashcourse.com, but it's going to be also the backdrop of all of my videos from now on, as long as I'm using this sort of setup here. I also have a great new mic that I'm talking on. I'm still adjusting it a little bit, so let me know how it looks. And as you'll notice, the videos are actually in 4K, so you can see all my little disgusting skin wrinkles there. I definitely need some lotion. Well, before further ado, let's talk about the Mentak Coalition. Erwin Mentak was a prisoner of the Lazax during the Twilight Wars, when many in his prison on Mol Primus decided they no longer wished to be under the Lazax power, and celebrated when the Lazax began to fall, when all of the armies converged on Mechatol Rex. Erwin Mentak led them to victory. Halfway through the Twilight Wars, they were freed, and during that time, they became a small coalition under Mentak's name. Because of the disparity and the destruction during the Twilight Wars, the Mentak Coalition were forced to become pirates and pillage those who had more money than they did. They managed to get their hands on a junkyard of cruisers and began reverse engineering these into a massive fleet. Now the Mentak Coalition is a more respected faction of almost every race in the galaxy, those who wish to be freed from the overarching powers of the larger factions. They will win their fights in some way, even if it means junking all of their ships after losing the big battles. The Mentak Coalition begin on Mol Primus. This is a 4-resource and 1-influence home system. This is a single planet, so it makes it really nice to be able to protect, and the 4 resources really goes a long way. The influence is kind of low, and I'll talk about that in a moment. They also begin on Mol Primus with 1 carrier, 2 cruisers, 3 fighters, 4 infantry, a space dock, and a PDS. They really would do some good having 2 carriers instead of 2 cruisers. However, they do get something special out of that, as we'll see later on, so it's not too bad. They also have 2 commodities, which is especially low, and is the same as something like Sardak Nor. They don't really have a way of trading with people. Instead, they get their trade goods a different way, and we'll see that with the pillage ability. This says, after one of your neighbors gains trade goods or resolves a transaction, if that neighbor has 3 or more trade goods, you may take one of their trade goods or commodities. So they skim 1 trade good off of every interaction. If you have a Hakan in your game, this is especially powerful. And they also have ambush. At the start of a space combat, you may roll 1 die for each of up to 2 cruisers or destroyers in that system of yours. For each result equal to or greater than that ship's combat value, produce 1 hit. Your opponent must assign it to one of their ships. So as long as you get the jump on somebody without any massive star destroyers, you'll be able to do some extra damage and push that damage through to one of their ships there. On here also is, of course, the flagship. This is an 8 cost, 7x2 combat, 1 movement, and 3 capacity flagship with sustained damage. But it does come with the ability other players' ships in the system cannot use sustained damage. What you're going to be using this for is more of a tactical advantage and less of pure raw power. And you'll kind of see that with everything of theirs. They also begin with 2 technologies, Sarween tools and plasma scoring. Plasma scoring says, when 1 or more of your units use bombardment or space cannon, one of those units may roll 1 additional die. This is a red technology, and I don't know if it's necessarily going to go anywhere. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Sarween Tools is much more helpful. It says, when 1 or more of your units use production, reduce the combined cost of the produced units by 1. So
being able to research this is not as powerful as actually having it off the bat because of the whole discount thing, and we'll go more into that mathematically in the analysis, but it's decent that they start with it. They also have a mech from the Prophecy of Kings expansion. This is Mole Terminus. It's a 2 cost and 6 combat value mech with sustained damage, like most mechs in the game, but it also gains the ability, other players' ground forces on this planet cannot use sustained damage. So this shuts down mechs. This does a lot of damage to factions that rely on mechs, especially those such as Nazroka. So being able to turn off sustained damage both in the sky and on the ground is quite powerful when you need it, but really situational. Now we're going to go into why having Sarweden tools is helpful with salvage operations. They don't begin with this, but they can research this as a faction-specific technology. It's 2 yellow prerequisites, and it gives a yellow. It says, after you win or lose a space combat, gain 1 trade good. If you won the combat, you may also produce 1 ship in that system of any type that was destroyed during the combat. So as I was explaining in their lore, they're really good about junking their own ships and getting something out of combat even if they happen to lose. So it's less of a risk to go into something that's a 50-50 shot, because you might come out with at least something, even if you have to pay for it. But that's on your way to the really, really powerful faction technology. This is mirror computing, and is a 3 yellow prerequisite technology. It says, when you spend trade goods, each trade good is worth 2 resources or influence instead of 1. How powerful is that? And it's on the path that you already want to be going. I'll talk about exactly how to get there, but just know, in the analysis, I'm going to repeat myself multiple times, you need mirror computing. Next we move on to their leader suite, with the Agent. This is Sufi Ann. She begins unlocked, and she has the exhaustible ability. After the Pillage faction ability is used against another player, you may exhaust this card. If you do, you and that player each draw 1 action card. So this kind of softens the blow off stealing something from somebody, and you can even negotiate them getting that back and helping each other out, but those negotiations will be left up to you. Next up is Sula Mentarion. This is a commander, which means it begins locked, but has the unlock have 4 cruisers on the game board. You start with 2, so you only need 2 more. Then you get the passive ability when it's unlocked. After you win a space combat, you may force your opponent to give you 1 promissory note from their hand. Keep in mind, this is their choice, but this is still pretty decent. And finally, the hero, Ipswich Loose Cannon. It unlocks by having 3 scored objectives, and when you unlock it, you get Sleeper Cell. At the start of a space combat that you are participating in, you may purge this card. If you do, for each other player's ship that is destroyed during this combat, place 1 ship of that type from your reinforcements in the active system. So this isn't necessarily super flashy and powerful right off the bat, but what it does is it pretty much gets you everything back and is more of a salvage operation extreme. So if you're managing to attack somebody, you can get everything that you risked back to you. And finally, we have Promise of Protection. This is their promissory note, which means you would give this out to another player. And they gain the ability, as an action, place this card face up in your play area. While this card is in your play area, the Mentak player cannot use his Pillage faction ability against you. If you activate a system that contains 1 or more of the Mentak player's units, return this card to the Mentak player. I'm going to be honest here, I don't like promissory notes like this. I don't ever see a reason to give these out. You might as well just promise verbally, but I guess if you're playing with a play group that might want a card, that's fine. I'm kind of just going to not talk about it, really. That being said about the promissory notes, they actually do have a nice suite of abilities that we'll get into here in the analysis. They're really quite fun to play with, and a little bit less aggressive than you'd think, being pirates and all. Let's check them out.
Alright, so the Mentak Coalition. I actually really like these guys because of their lore and everything. Reading this on the back of the faction sheet before my Twilight Imperium games gets me really into the mood, because I think this is really built around the lore. Can't remember if that's bottom up or top down. But anyway, it's really built with an idea of all of these factions and the universe and all of these planets in mind, and then all of the faction abilities and everything are built around that. So that's why I kind of give you in depth a little bit into their story before getting into the components, because it helps out a lot. Get that sort of gears working in your mind. Anyway, I think the Mentak Coalition are important to this game's playstyle because you don't really have a faction other than them that's politically charged in a negative way. You have, of course, the economic Hakan, you have political kind of diplomatic extra, and then you have the Mentak Coalition that's stealing people's stuff. That's rightfully theirs. They've traded for it, they've earned it, and you're taking it from them, and that's just one of their faction abilities. So, I think it's important to understand one major thing about the Mentak before we go into specifics. They are a meta faction, and what I mean by that is you have to know the meta of your table. If you're getting super into this game, I recommend not giving this to new players, because although it seems pretty simple overhead, none of the other factions really just take things, except for like super specific abilities with like grabbing action cards at promissory notes. This is just all the time. As long as you're next to the Mentak, they're taking your stuff, unless you can pay them off some other way. If your friends at your table don't like playing aggressively, don't like playing mean, they just want a really rich and big plastic sort of game, Mentak Coalition might not be your choice because you become enemy number one at the table. If you're playing extremely aggressively with things such as the Necrovirus, the Mahakt, the Volwraith Cabal in your game, you also might not want to play the Mentak because they aren't really able to keep up with that. You need to play in this sort of meta where people are okay with you using your faction abilities no matter what they are, and will kind of get over it and realize that you're not that much of a threat. You're just taking a little bit here and there instead of annihilating them like the Cabal might. So the Mentak is played in this very thin gray area of mean and not mean. It's kind of strange, and you have to figure out the politics and the diplomacy of this faction before you start to figure out their actual faction abilities. That's so important. Okay, so let's talk about the Mentak Coalition in a more overview really quick. The Mentak are sort of running and gunning, ambushing people, losing a lot in battles, but not really because they're getting stuff back. They're losing less than their opponents, hopefully. They're getting trade goods out of those combats, skimming trade goods off of everybody's abilities, and also being able to use those trade goods for more. Sort of a commercial type instead of a pirating so much. They're also able to turn off sustained damage up in the sky and on the ground, utilizing their flagship and their mechs, so they're more likely to win combats a little bit that way if you're going ambushing those big cruisers, which I think is very thematic. But these mechanics are kind of all over the place. In order to really lock them down, you have to go over just one of these strategies instead of trying to extend yourself so greatly. Because they're not actually that amazing off the bat with their 4 resources and only 1 influence, they don't actually have that great of a command counter economy. So they're not able to spread too thin and not able to defend themselves if they might, somehow be able to spread that thin. So what's really important is your tech tree and certain strategy cards right off the bat. Let's talk about those strategy cards first. The Mentak Coalition love leadership. They love being able to extend themselves across the board. They love being able to fix that command counter economy and get things done. They need to be able to produce things not just off of their faction abilities, but preemptively as well. They can't win fights or even lose important things out of fights unless they have those important things to begin with. So you need to make more than just cruisers. Destroyers are a good start to be able to get rid of the chaff, and then your flagship is actually a lot better than I was making it seem, because turning off sustained damage allows you to take down those massive objective winning things such as war suns or flagships without spending too many resources to do so. What's also important for them is construction. Being able to make forward docks, preparing for those structure objectives, and producing out of those forward docks in order to more easily ambush people is your go-to. In conjunction with that is warfare. Obviously you can't grab both in the same round, but if you've got those forward docks out, then you're able to produce and move into people's quite possibly home systems with them, ambushing them and really taking down their fleets all in one go. You need to have some friends to be able to do this, but I don't think that's not an option. You still can be friendly with the Mentak. Of course, they can be a Mechatol Rex faction. Anybody can be, but they don't have any abilities that specifically help them. They just have a lose less ability in the salvage operations and such. So taking Mechatol Rex is kind of if you can situation, and not really what I think you should be going for. Instead, grab technology as much as possible. You need to be able to rush for mirror computing as fast as humanly or whatever this thing is possible. So going off of technology, let's move into their tech path. They obviously start with Sarween tools, and you're going to be wanting to go from mirror computing. Is salvage operations necessary? Well, talking about the meta again, are you going to actually be participating in a lot of combats? If you are, then the commander and salvage operations becomes that much more useful. I definitely think that you should commit to being an aggressive person as the Mentak. Utilizing commander, salvage operations, and their hero later in the game is going to be your go-to if you're sort of taking people down from the back. So how are you getting to salvage operations? Well, you could have a yellow tech skip outside of Sarween tools, but I think that if you don't, there is a really good option here. Graviton laser system is alright if you're going to be playing defensively. If you are worried about people coming into your home system and gutting you while you're trying to gut them, Graviton laser system is going to help you out, especially because you begin with plasma scoring. But I think that Scanlink Drone Network is your more go-to at this point. Exploring is going to help you not only get your relics that might help you in battles, but boost your economy with those attachments and be able to more likely trade with people if you're trading out those fragments for a couple of trade goods here, a couple of trade goods there. That will help you win fights easier and salvage more. It's kind of an exponential growth with Scanlink Drone Network, so if you're getting that early, then go ahead. But if you have a tech skip, don't worry about it. Just use the yellow tech skip, rush to salvage operations, rush to mirror computing. It has diminishing returns, mirror computing does. With an early grabbing of it, you're more likely to be able to create those huge fleets, win with those huge fleets, create bigger fleets, and do the spendy objectives, the ones that allow you to spend trade goods or make you have a flagship or a war sun on the game board. It's really helpful to be able to do that. So that's really helpful to know yellow. And I know that most factions like blue, and that's always an option, but if you want to do a little bit more of an interesting way of playing them and get something that other factions might not be able to, a yellow-red strategy with them is really, really strong. And let me explain. Your defenses will be okay with plasma scoring, but if you're able to go into self-assembly routines and AI development algorithm with red, that is absolutely going to set you up for a large fleet type gameplay. AI development algorithm early game allows you to exhaust to build outside of your normal tech tree worth of unit upgrades, and then exhaust that card later to get trade goods out of it. Not only are these trade goods worth double with mirror computing, but getting to Cruiser 2 and even Destroyer 2, skipping that green on Cruiser 2, lets you absolutely dominate using your ambush ability. And when you actually take those planets using self-assembly routines, you can make mechs for basically free, especially if you have mirror computing, create sort of forward docks, and disable sustained damage on anybody's mechs coming in. You're actually able to protect what you take with the Mentak if you take self-assembly routines. So getting that triple red and possibly moving into assault cannon makes you an absolutely immense force to be reckoned with. Not only will assault cannon delete things, ambush will delete things, you'll win off of it, you'll salvage those, and you'll get trade goods in the process. Going yellow and then red afterwards is your absolute go-to with the Mentak Coalition if you want more than just a simple game. If you're going for pure effectiveness, blue, the normal blue path, might be good if instead the first couple objectives are more about positioning and less about maybe spending or winning fights. But not only will you have the technology objectives down with a lot of technologies everywhere in yellow and red, but you'll also be able to win fights easier and get those objectives easier. So like I said in the beginning, they're not immensely mean, but building up that huge fleet and being an absolute force on the table is good with the Mentak. However, I want to talk about two cards that I really don't like with them. I already kind of talked about the promissory notes. I don't like ones that are just turning off your abilities when you could just be nice to somebody and not have to spend a card for it. If you're actually at a tournament scene, that might be helpful. It's just kind of okay. I don't think anybody's going to pay for it. I also really don't like their hero. I think their hero would be a lot better if you were able to utilize it after a fight instead of having to purge it before and then hoping for the best. Now, I know this would be hard because you have to kind of mentally keep track of what was lost during that fight, but everybody at the table should kind of be able to do that already if you have your hero unlocked. Not committing to your hero beforehand would be a lot better. However, with their sort of gigantic fleets, you kind of know when you're going to win or when you're going to lose, and their hero is absolutely what you're going to be using if you're going for the Mechatol Rex strategy. If you want to push ahead for that and utilize your forward docks or warfare to get into that, and maybe you need a couple points and you need that bonus off of having Rex, then Sleeper Cell, the hero, is a lot better in that situation, but I don't really see it utilized too much outside of just the normal salvage operations use. So there you have it with the Mentak. All in all, go for technology as much as you possibly can. If you need to grab politics to get it, then go for it. But if you can speed towards mirror computing, you can actually do the secondary of technology and even the second primary a lot easier. Getting to mirror computing as fast as possible, maybe even drafting into a pie slice that has a yellow skip in it, and then sort of backtracking across yellow is good as well. If you need to skip salvage operations before getting MC, then you're good to go. But getting that as soon as possible is your absolute best ability with this faction. Get it, and it will help out everything else. And then if you can actually get AI development algorithm and get even more trade goods off of that, then you're going to be golden when it comes to spending objectives. So really quick at the end of the video, I'd like to remind you to visit cardboardcrashcourse.com if you want more of this content, if you want to read my blogs or anything like that. I'll be starting a podcast soon, so stay tuned for that. I'd also like to thank my patrons, especially the Crash Course Professor Turtle Dude. If you want to become a professor or any other tier, then that will also be in my website below. So go ahead and check all of that out. Thank you very much, all of you, for watching. Pax Magnifica, Bellum Gloriosum.